Good morning. Morning, morning. Morning, 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 morning. Okay, good morning. Relationships and how to survive them. I haven't, when I do these talks, I don't really think anything too much before. And today I'm suffering a little bit under a migraine. So it's going to be fairly random insights about relationships. If you have any questions or comments, um, feel free to add them as we go along. Okay, relationships. Inevitably, when two people spend time together, there will be disagreements, arguments, conflicts. It's inevitable. The important thing is what you make it mean, because the chances are they will continue, because nobody can agree on everything all the time. But what do you make them mean when they happen? Sometimes you get situations where people fall in love and the honeymoon period is there and it's just great. How wonderful is that? And then something comes, an issue comes, and one of the or the other makes it mean, oh my God, it means that we're not compatible. Look, we're having a terrible argument. We're not compatible. It means that the relationship is not viable. It's over. And of course, that isn't the case, or that isn't the only way of looking at conflict. Another great way of looking at conflict would be to give it the meaning that love brings up anything unlike itself for the purpose of healing. Love brings up anything unlike itself for the purpose of healing. So it's because you've got a profound resonating feeling between you that has given you a deep sense of safety, that deep-rooted issues float to the surface for resolution. And it by no means means that this relationship is not viable. In fact, it means the opposite. It can be made to mean the opposite. That somehow there's something between you that creates a safety for these issues to come up and be resolved, so that a deeper love, a deeper trust, a simpler way of being can evolve between you. So this is like, what do you make it mean? When someone doesn't agree with you, do you make it mean that that person doesn't love you? Oh, he can't love me if he shouts at me, if he doesn't, agree with me, if he finds me wrong, or if he says things. How can he love me? And so we give it another meaning. Oh, the relationship's not viable. He can't love me because he said that. Well, that doesn't really necessarily be true either, because true love doesn't really have a reason. It's just a magic that opens up between two people. And then the two people use it, or they don't. So then that brings us on to the two basic types of relationship. One we could call a psychological entanglement, and the other is a loving relationship. But there aren't actually so many loving relationships. There's a lot of psychological entanglement. Even the way that a lot of relationships start is basically psychological. You know, that thing of like, a good way to describe it is the two types of relationship is how they're depicted in the tarot. In the tarot, they depict a loving relationship as two people who are not holding hands, but are standing naked together with an angel above them in paradise. So they're two sovereign individuals in their combined energy field being blessed by life. And the other card is the Devil card, and that depicts two people, again naked, chained together with the devil on top of them. That's the psychological entanglement. That's where projections happen. That's where transference happens. That's where you have a thing called the anima projection. And what it is, it's like, for a man, I have if my preference is women, I have an ideal feminine somehow in my mind. Maybe it's drawn from aspects of my mother, maybe it's drawn from women that I've seen, maybe it's drawn from movies, maybe it's wherever. It's an ideal. And if I come across someone who embodies that ideal, I will find that something literally pops out of me, a projection is projected out of me onto that person. They fulfill my ideal, and so that I get that they can receive my projection, and I start to relate to them as my projection. And it obviously happens with, the other way around. So you can have one person projecting on one person, or you can have both people projecting on each other. And this feels like falling in love. When you launch a projection onto somebody, it's like the minute I saw her, I knew. And I had this experience myself. It caused me no end of bother until I distinguished it as a projection. Because it's quite different from actually being with someone in a conscious, loving relationship where you're actually seeing the being as they are in full acceptance. Whereas when you're on the other side, when you're in the projection, you're not actually engaging with the person. You're engaging with your projection. And they're always slightly mystified. They like the energy, they like the attention, but they don't quite get it. They can't quite receive it. So this projection, if you project out your feminine and you're a man, or your male, you project out your male if you're a woman, it allows you to understand that part of you that had been suppressed and not really seen, and that you get to know it by projecting it out. But the course of a relationship that is fundamentally a projection, generally it's very exciting to start with, and it just really feels like this is it. And it can be very passionate as well. Because once the feminine is placed out, it kind of makes the male feel more male. And the female is getting the benefit of the projection of the male as well. So it gets very sort of archetypal to start with. But then, because fundamentally they're not engaging with each other, but with projections, then it can get very, the passion can go negative. Like there can be a lot of anger and resentment that comes up because the person obviously isn't who you'd been projecting them to be. They've got their own personality, and after a while, they kind of get that they're not being got. And it can cause really intense interchanges. And when you launch your projection onto someone, it really feels like this is it. This is the one. And it isn't the one. It's you just actually experiencing a psychological dynamic. It's not the one. And as that, it's very hard to let go of that. The tarot card, you see, they're chained together, and you can't just walk away from it. Even if you walk away from it physically, because it was psychological in the first place, it still has it runs you. They're very difficult to see and very difficult to get out of, and often mistaken as love, whereas love is something else. In order to have a loving relationship, we have to be free. We have to have transmuted the neediness. And how do we do that? How does a needy person let go of that neediness? And the answer is by returning to the self, a moment in presence. And you start to recognize that you don't actually need anything, that you are complete, that you are fulfillment. Every time we come into the moment where we actually are, the truth about us, that's fulfillment. It's complete, it's whole, there's nothing that we need there. And spending time in this place starts to dissolve deep-rooted psychological neediness, which comes out of a feeling that you haven't got everything that you need, but you have. So as we become free, as we move out of identifying as our psychological self, then our relationships become much simpler and much more authentic and much more profound. Because if you're living as who you think you are, if you're living as an embodiment of the psychological self, and like most people somewhere in there, there's the idea, I'm not good enough, things don't work, there's something wrong, then those deep-rooted primal negative thoughts will show up in everything. So you won't be good enough to have a loving relationship. You won't be good enough to have a happy life. It affects everything. So it's important that we really get this thing about who am I very clear. And not just clear in the level of understanding, but clear on the level of experience. Because then we really can just put down a lot of baggage. And what we can't put down presents itself, exposes itself naturally in a beautiful process of self-realization. Self-realization is not about the psychological self, unraveling the knots of the psychological self. Self-realization is experiencing what's behind that, what's before that, what's within that. And this is the way that we turn from having psychological entanglements, and we become more and more having a loving relationship. We could say that a loving relationship is when two people travel like this through life together. They're individuals, and there's a vibration between them. There's a beingness they share. And then a psychological entanglement masquerading as a relationship is like that. It's completely like that. And there's multiple projections going on between the two people. For example, if your relationship with your father or your relationship with your mother has not been resolved, and accepted and released, then chances are when you attract someone, that will allow you to project that unresolvedness. So you start actually responding to that person almost as if it's your mother, or it's those qualities that you haven't resolved that are the basis of your relationship with your mother, and likewise with your father. Some people say that you can't expect to have a real loving relationship until you have completely resolved your relationship with your mother and your father. Because until then, you will be subtly projecting it onto primal relationships, most important relationships, and in some cases, onto all relationships. So it's very clear, in order to have a loving relationship that's clear and simple and full of love and grows and flows, you have to first be clear about who are you? Who are you? What is the self? And secondly, to be able to release and let go and resolve any issues you might have coming from your childhood with your parents. And this again is something that happens naturally and beautifully once we make, I don't know, is commitment the right word? It's a scary word for most people. A commitment to truth, a commitment to knowing the self. And then our path through life, it appears as a journey toward love. And it becomes easier to love as you realize that's really what you are. And that the thing that was causing the complication was this false sense of self, this psychological self, this wounded self. If you're identifying as your wounded child, if you're identifying as being unloved, if you're identifying as being unlovable, which would have come out of some experience you had in your childhood, which you then gave the meaning to of not being lovable, of not being wanted, then that will show up. You'll attract people who don't want you. You'll go for people who don't want you. There are many different variations of this, but I had that very same thing in my earlier life, is that I wasn't wanted. So I attracted someone who didn't want me. And something was satisfied in attracting someone that didn't want me. It fulfilled the truth that I currently had about myself. And so what's amazing is that we can transform. That there isn't a fixed way that we are. There isn't a fixed way that we are. There isn't any way that we are. We like to think there is, and it's popular, people say, oh no, you've got patterns and you've got wounds from your past. But who I am is not who the past says I am. That would be like saying Daniel Craig is all the James Bond films he's made. That's not who he is. That's just what he acted in. He's quite separate from James Bond. And in the same way, I'm not who the past says I am. In this moment, here, now, where it's the only place where life is real, is there a wounded child? And can you call that child into this now? Do it. Call it in. Don't have it lurking in the there then. Oh dear, back there somewhere. No, if there is a wounded child, call it into this now. And when you really do, it can't stand in the light. It can't make it into the full now of this moment. It can't come. You have to dive out of this moment into the past in order to re-experience it. Can't come into this now. It will vanish. And this is the principle of calling everything that you're running from, face it. Call it forward. Whatever you're fearful of, call it forward. I once had an experience where I was in Brighton and the tide was very far out, the sea was very far out, and there was a groin, like a jetty, like a big concrete jetty coming out, really quite big. And when the tide was out, I noticed that at the very bottom of it there was a kind of archway door. I thought, wow, I've never seen that before. I wonder where it leads. So I went over to it and I went in. So you go in and then suddenly you turn right and there's a tunnel going right the way through. So I thought, wow, I wonder what is at the end of that. So I started walking towards the light at the end of the tunnel, and I noticed some movement. I go, that's weird. I wonder what is that? And so then I started like, who's there? And then no response came. There was a bit of echo. And when I stopped, it stopped. So I walked on, and it seemed to be getting bigger. So then I'm thinking, well, I'm going to say some mantras. I'm Om Namah Shivaya. And then it's like I'm getting a little bit scary now, because I'm thinking maybe it's, some drunk guy, maybe it's some tramp, maybe it's some guy, carrying dark forces, what is it? And I said, who's there? Who's there? And I had this moment, do I turn back and leave it? Or do I just go on? And I thought, I'll leave it now. I thought, I'll go on. And then about 2 or 3 steps later, I had the most astonishing realization. What it was my shadow. The light behind me was reflecting my shadow onto a wall in front of me where they blocked it off deep down into the tunnel. And I realized, wow, I was being scared by my own shadow. But when I faced it, I realized that it didn't actually have any reality whatsoever. And I had been projecting my fears onto that simple shadow. And that's really what it's like. That's really what it's like. So call it in, this moment is always clear and full of light. Any shadow, call it, face it, and you'll find that it vanishes. And that fundamentally your freedom itself, that you're whole, that you're complete, that you lack nothing. So, loving relationships. The other thing that's important with loving relationships and flowing with them, there's another distinction that's really important. We have to distinguish between the story and the meaning. So, for example, you're in your relationship, and then something happens, and then you have a big argument, and the basis of the argument is, you did this, you did that, you did this, you did that, you said this, you said that. And then the other person goes, no, you said, it's like when there's always 2 sides to the story, isn't there? It's like when relationships break up or have a big argument, you go and tell your friends what happened on one side, and the other person tells them friends what happened on the other side. And even though they shared the same experience, each one is telling the story from a place of innocence, blaming the other one. And, that is just amazing. If you talk to people like I do, doing my readings, you find that everybody, literally everybody, like really awake people as well, pretty much everybody recounts the story of what happened as if they were the innocent one, the victim to which it happened. And a lot of arguing is about getting the story straight. What happened? Whereas actually it doesn't matter. And there's no truth in it, or very little to be gained by going down that road. Because from that person's from my perspective, it was like this. From your perspective, it was like that. Well, which one was right? And the answer is there isn't an objective truth about it. There isn't a way that it was. It's all perspective. So forget that. Don't waste time trying to win the story, trying to be the one who's got the right perspective, because there isn't one. And getting that deeply can save you a lot of conflict. And that leads us into something amazing, which is, I say it a lot, and I'm always surprised that people don't get it. And it's this: who you're being, that she or he is, gives you how you get them. Who you're being, that I am right now, is giving you how you're getting me. Who you're being, that I am, is giving you how you're getting me. Everybody that's watching is getting me differently, aren't they? Who you're being, that you are, gives you how you get yourself. You get yourself differently each time you encounter yourself. Why? Because who you're being, that you are, is changing. What does it mean, who you're being that something is? Who you're being that your partner is gives you how you get them. It means what kind of space you are for them determines how they appear to you. What you're allowing determines how they will turn up for you. What you're projecting on them will determine how they turn up to you. How you're identifying them will determine how they turn up to you. What you're thinking about them will determine how, if you've got negative thoughts about them, that's going to affect how you perceive them, which is going to be how you get them. So this is important, because the way we look at it, we say, you are that way. And they go, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. The truth is that who I am being, that you are, is what gives me how I get you. There isn't a way that you are. So this means that, there's so much time in relationship arguments is on trying to change the other person. But how about if you looked to yourself and got clear about who you were being that they were, such that they didn't even need to change and it wouldn't bother you? Because your reaction to them is your responsibility. You make me feel this. No, they don't. You make me think this. No, they don't. You make me do this. No, they don't. And this shift can be really amazing if you start using it. Because then it's like up to you. You take responsibility for how you're getting somebody. And if you start looking into it, you'll see that there are all kinds of payoffs as well. And it opens up a whole thing for learning. So rather than telling somebody who they are, people know who they are. People, back in the day, people always were telling me how I was. Oh, you're so, but I live with me. I know how I am. I might not accept what I see, but it doesn't really help you telling me how you get me, because how you get me is given by who you're being, that I am, and that's created by all your past causes and conditions. And there isn't actually a way that I am. This is the wonderful thing. So you can spend a lot of time looking at the wrong aspect of what's going on. So the real question is, who are you being that relationships are such that they turn up this way? And why? Who are you being that your partner is such that they turn up for you this way? So we've done a half hour, and I will continue this relationships point 2, and there's more to be said, I think. And if you have any particular questions, then if you got anything, then feel free to include them or write them in the comments, and we can look at specific things. But the new possibility, the possibility that we want, is the recognition that there is a distinction between a psychological entanglement and a loving relationship. And a loving relationship is possible once I'm complete in myself. And when we're in a loving relationship, it is the most amazing thing, isn't it? It's life at its best. So I'm going to stop here because I've got this migraine at the moment. It's come out of nowhere. Anybody got any hints about that? So much the better. And the next time we'll continue with this subject, and we'll look at betrayal and how no one can betray you without your permission. We'll do that next time. Have a wonderful day. No one can betray you without your permission.